There is something nobody prepares you for when you begin pulling back from the world. It does not feel like peace at first. It feels like withdrawal. Like something is being taken from you that you did not even realize you were addicted to. And that feeling, that subtle panic when the noise stops, is precisely what Carl Jung believed most people spend their entire lives running from. Not death, not failure, not loss, themselves. The version of themselves that exists when no one is watching, when no performance is required, when the social personality that took decades to construct has no audience left to perform for. Most people will never meet that version of themselves, not because they are incapable of it, because the modern world has made it almost impossible to sit still long enough for it to surface. There is always another message to reply to, another notification demanding attention, another conversation to maintain, another relationship to manage, another version of yourself to perform for another set of people with another set of expectations. And somewhere inside all of that constant movement, the real question never gets asked. Who are you when none of this is required of you? Jung spent his life studying what happens when a human being never asks that question. And what he found was not comforting. Because what he found was that a person who never disappears, who never separates from the noise long enough to hear their own mind, does not remain themselves. They slowly become a composite of everyone else's needs, a personality assembled not from genuine selfhood, but from decades of unconscious adaptation to the expectations of others. And by the time most people realize this has happened, they have forgotten who they were before the adaptation began. This video is about what happens when you finally disappear, not dramatically, not permanently, but long enough for something true to surface. And I want to warn you now, what surfaces is not always comfortable, but it is real. And real is the only thing that can actually save you. The first thing you need to understand is why disappearing feels wrong before it feels right. From the earliest stages of social development, every human being receives the same implicit message in slightly different forms. Being available is being good. The child who responds quickly is praised. The employee who replies instantly is trusted. The friend who is always reachable is called loyal. The partner who is always emotionally accessible is called devoted. And slowly, without anyone explicitly saying so, a belief forms deep in the psychological architecture. My worth is measured by my availability. To disappear is to become worthless. To go quiet is to fail the people who need me. And so people remain perpetually accessible long after that accessibility has stopped serving them. They reply when they have nothing real to say. They attend gatherings they would rather leave. They maintain friendships that have been emotionally dead for years. They perform presence in conversations where their mind is somewhere else entirely. Not out of genuine connection, out of fear. Fear of what people will think if they stop. Fear of what the silence will reveal. Fear of who they might be without the constant confirmation that other people's attention provides. Jung believed this fear was not weakness. It was the logical result of a society that had confused performance with identity. When you are rewarded long enough for performing a certain version of yourself, you eventually stop being able to distinguish the performance from the person. The mask stops feeling like something you put on. It starts feeling like your actual face. And that is when something quietly catastrophic has occurred. Because underneath the mask, the real face, the real self, with its actual preferences and genuine reactions and honest perception of the world, begins suffocating. Not loudly, quietly. In the form of a vague exhaustion that never fully goes away. A flatness in experiences that used to carry feeling. A growing sense that you are present in your own life, but not fully inhabiting it. As though you are watching yourself from a slight distance, performing the correct behaviors, saying the correct things, maintaining the correct relationships, but never quite arriving. Jung called this state the dominance of the persona. The persona, the social mask, the performed self, had become so powerful that the genuine self could no longer be heard beneath it. And the only way back was through a period of deliberate separation, not from life, from the noise that was preventing life from being felt honestly. Now here is what actually happens when you begin to withdraw. Not what you imagine will happen. What actually happens? The first thing you notice is not peace. The first thing you notice is discomfort. Your hands reach for the phone without conscious instruction. Your mind generates phantom notifications, a buzzing that is not there, but feels like it should be. You feel the urge to explain yourself to people who have not even noticed you are gone yet. That reaction, that automatic reaching, that reflexive need to remain connected, is extraordinarily revealing, because it shows you, with uncomfortable clarity, how much of your psychological stability was dependent on external input, on validation that arrived in the form of replies, on reassurance that came in the form of attention, on the continuous, low-level confirmation that you existed in other people's awareness. Most people do not recognize this as a form of addiction, but Jung would have recognized it immediately, because the mechanism is identical. When the substance is removed, when the constant stimulation stops, the nervous system reacts as though something necessary has been taken away. And in a sense, it has. Not something healthy, but something familiar. And the human mind, as Jung understood deeply, does not always distinguish between what is good for it and what it has become accustomed to, or familiarity and safety feel the same from the inside, even when familiarity is slowly destroying you. So the first phase of disappearing is not liberation. It is discomfort. And most people never get past this phase, because the moment discomfort appears, the mind presents an immediate solution. Go back, reply, reach out, explain yourself, return to the noise, and the return feels like relief, which convinces the person that they needed the connection, when what they actually needed was the discomfort to deepen long enough to show them what was underneath it. If you stay with the discomfort, if you resist the automatic return to noise, something begins to shift. It does not happen dramatically. It happens in small, quiet observations. You start noticing for the first time how certain relationships feel in your body when you are not in them. Not the performed feeling, not how you feel when you are actively managing the interaction, monitoring the dynamic, adjusting your tone to keep things comfortable, the actual feeling, the one that exists in the absence of performance. And for many people, this is the first genuinely disturbing realization of disappearing. Because the actual feeling is often not what they expected. The friendship that seemed warm in person feels differently in its absence. Not warm, familiar. The way a habit feels familiar. The way returning to an old environment feels familiar, even when that environment was never particularly good for you. The relationship that felt connected during constant communication reveals in silence how much of that connection was constructed through constant communication rather than genuine resonance. The social group that felt like belonging begins to feel, from a distance, like a shared agreement to perform belonging, everyone maintaining the illusion for everyone else, nobody quite comfortable enough to be honest. These observations are not cynical, they are accurate, and accuracy, even when uncomfortable, is the beginning of something better. Because you cannot build a genuinely nourishing life on relationships you have never honestly evaluated. You can only maintain the performance of one. Jung wrote extensively about what he called the collective unconscious, the vast shared psychological inheritance that operates beneath individual awareness and shapes human behavior in ways most people never examine. One of its most powerful mechanisms is what Jung described as social hypnosis, not in a dramatic sense, in a very ordinary, very daily sense. When you are embedded continuously in a social environment, your perception is shaped by that environment in ways you cannot fully see from inside it. The values you hold feel like your own values. The opinions you express feel like your own conclusions. The desires you pursue feel like your genuine aspirations. But pull back far enough, for long enough, and something uncomfortable emerges. How much of what you believe was handed to you by the environment you happen to be placed in? How much of what you want was shaped by what the people around you rewarded. How much of who you are is genuinely yours, and how much is an adaptation so thorough it became indistinguishable from the original. Distance does something that proximity cannot. It allows you to observe the structure you were inside, to see the shape of the social system you were participating in, rather than simply being moved by it. And that perspective, that view from outside the noise, reveals things about human interaction that are impossible to see from within it. You begin noticing the unconscious negotiations that underlie almost every social exchange. The approval-seeking disguised as conversation, the status management dressed as friendship, the emotional extraction that presents itself as intimacy. None of it is necessarily malicious. Most of it is entirely unconscious, but it is happening, constantly, in almost every social environment you have ever inhabited. And once you see it, you cannot simply unsee it. This is also where the disappearance turns inward. Because eventually, when you have observed the patterns in others long enough, the mirror turns, and you see the same patterns in yourself. The validation seeking that presents itself as sharing, the need for admiration that disguises itself as openness, the desire to be chosen that calls itself love, the anxiety about being forgotten that masquerades as loyalty. You see the places where your kindness was motivated not by genuine care, but by the unconscious need to be needed, where your helpfulness was driven not by generosity, but by the fear of what would happen if you stopped being useful, where you maintained connections not because they nourished you, but because severing them would have required confronting your own fear of abandonment. This is the encounter with the shadow that Jung believed was absolutely unavoidable on the path toward genuine selfhood. Not the evil parts of you, the hidden parts, the parts that were rejected early, pushed into the dark because they did not fit the version of yourself that earned safety and love. Your anger, your selfishness, your exhaustion with certain people, your honest assessments that were too threatening to express, your desire to simply stop, to put down the weight of maintaining everyone else's emotional comfort and rest. Most people suppress these things so thoroughly, they lose the ability to even recognize them as real. They call them toxic, selfish, wrong. But suppression does not eliminate psychological material. It buries it, and buried things do not disappear. They surface anyway, in physical exhaustion, in sudden emotional flooding, in the recurring collapse of relationships that follow the same pattern, no matter how hard you try to make them different. Because the pattern is not in the relationships, it is in the unexamined material you bring into every relationship, and silence is the only environment in which that material can be honestly examined. Now let us talk about what the disappearance reveals about the people in your life, because this is where many people discover something they were not prepared for. When you become less available, not dramatically, not cruelly, just genuinely less accessible, the responses of the people around you reveal something that was always true, but impossible to see while you were continuously present. Some people react with irritation, not because they miss you exactly, because your predictability has been disrupted. And predictability, as Jung understood, is a form of psychological control. When someone is reliably available to you, reliably responsive, reliably present, reliably performing the same role in your life, it creates a sense of stability that has very little to do with genuine connection. It is the stability of a habit, of a known quantity, of an emotional resource you could count on being there. The moment that reliability shifts, the nervous system registers it as a threat, not the threat of losing a person, the threat of losing a source. And that distinction is one of the most important things you will ever understand about human relationships. Because very few people will tell you directly that what they valued about you was the reliable supply of attention, reassurance, energy, or emotional labor you provided. They will say they miss you. They will say they are worried about you. They will say the distance feels wrong. But watch carefully whether the reaching out is about you, your actual inner life, what you are experiencing, what you need, or whether it is about restoring the dynamic they had become comfortable within. Many times what people miss is not you. It is the version of you that served a particular psychological function for them. And that is not cruelty on their part. It is simply the honest operation of unconscious human need. But it is something you deserve to see clearly. There is another category of response to your disappearance that is worth understanding. Some people, when you become less accessible, do not reach out at all. The silence is simply met with silence. And this, too, is information. Not necessarily that they did not care, but that the connection was more dependent on your active maintenance than either of you realized. Many relationships survive entirely on the effort of one person, not because the other person is indifferent, but because the one who always reaches out, always initiates, always keeps the connection alive, has made it possible to never notice that the effort is one-directional. Remove that effort, and the shape of the relationship becomes visible. Sometimes what you find surprises you. People you assumed were peripheral reach out without being asked. People you thought were close reveal, through their silence, how contingent the closeness actually was. And slowly, the social landscape reorganizes itself around something more honest than performance. Around who is genuinely present versus who was present because you made it easy for them to be. Jung believed there was a profound difference between loneliness and solitude. Most people treat them as the same experience, isolation as a uniform, free state of being without others. But they are psychologically opposite. Loneliness is the pain of being unseen. It is the ache that comes from being surrounded by people who interact with your persona, your utility, your role, your performed self, but never encounter the actual person underneath. You can be profoundly lonely in a full room, in a long relationship, in a social life that looks, from the outside, like the picture of connection. Because the loneliness is not about the quantity of people present. It is about the quality of being witnessed. Solitude is something else entirely. Solitude is the experience of being in your own presence without anxiety, of not requiring external witnesses to confirm your existence, of being able to sit inside your own mind without immediately reaching for distraction. Most people have very little experience of genuine solitude, because genuine solitude requires having done enough internal work that your own company is not threatening, that the silence does not immediately flood with the unprocessed material you have been avoiding, that being alone does not feel like being abandoned, not by others, but by yourself. Jung believed that the capacity for genuine solitude was one of the clearest markers of psychological maturity. Not because it meant becoming comfortable with isolation, but because it meant becoming genuinely comfortable with yourself. And you cannot be comfortable with yourself, truly, deeply, stably comfortable, while large portions of your inner life remain unexamined, while the shadow continues operating from underground, while the persona continues running the show. Here is what begins to happen when the solitude deepens enough. The desperate quality of your social needs begins to shift, not because you care less about people, because you have stopped needing them to perform a function that was always yours, to provide for yourself. The need for constant reassurance begins to quiet, not because reassurance is no longer welcome, but because your sense of who you are has stopped depending on its continuous arrival. The hunger for approval weakens, not because you have become indifferent to how others experience you, but because you have developed enough relationship with your own perception that external validation is no longer the primary source of your sense of reality. The compulsive need to explain yourself to people fades, not because you have given up on being understood, but because you have realized that the version of understanding you were chasing was often not genuine understanding at all. It was agreement, validation, the mirroring back of what you needed someone to believe about you. And real understanding, the genuine kind, does not require that performance. It simply requires honesty from both people. When you return from this period, and you do return, because disappearing is not a destination, it is a passage, you do not return the same way you left. Something has permanently reorganized in the way you move through social life. You become slower to invest, not colder. Slower, because you have developed enough self-knowledge to recognize the difference between genuine resonance and the temporary electricity of projection, between real connection and the comfortable habit of shared performance. You become more honest about your own needs and limits, not as a strategy, as a natural consequence of having spent real time examining what those needs and limits actually are, rather than simply reacting to them unconsciously. You become genuinely less interested in being understood by everyone, because you have realized that the desperate need to be understood by everyone was itself a symptom of the underdeveloped sense of self that needed external confirmation to feel real. When you know more clearly who you are, you stop requiring constant proof from the world. And perhaps most significantly, you stop performing closeness with people you are not actually close to. You stop maintaining relationships past the point of genuine life in them, out of guilt or fear or the discomfort of honest endings. You stop spending your most alive hours with people who make you feel more alone than solitude does. Not dramatically, not with declarations. Simply, quietly, with the calm understanding that your time and presence are finite, and the places you spend them matter more than you previously allowed yourself to believe. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. He did not say it was easy. He did not say it was comfortable. He did not say the people around you would celebrate it, because often they do not. Growth changes social dynamics. When you become less available, less predictable, less willing to perform versions of yourself that no longer fit. Some people will experience this as loss. Some will experience it as rejection. Some will experience it as a judgment of who they are. None of that is necessarily your responsibility to manage. What is your responsibility is the interior work, the willingness to sit in silence long enough to hear what has been drowned out, to meet the parts of yourself that were abandoned in the process of becoming acceptable, to examine with real honesty how much of your life has been organized around other people's comfort at the expense of your own coherence, and to ask, not rhetorically but genuinely, what would it mean to begin living from the actual self rather than the performed one? That question has no simple answer, but the asking of it changes something fundamental. Because once you have genuinely asked who you are without the noise, without the performance, without the audience, you cannot fully return to a life built on never asking. You begin making different choices, quieter choices often, less dramatic than you might expect, but oriented for the first time towards something real. Carl Jung believed that until the unconscious is made conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Think about what that means for the question of disappearing. The person who never disappears, who remains continuously embedded in the noise, the performance, the management of others' perceptions, is not choosing their life. They are being chosen by it, moved by patterns they have never examined, by needs they have never honestly named, by fears they have never directly faced. And they will experience this as just how life is, as fate, as the particular shape their existence happened to take, when in fact it is simply the unconscious running the same patterns it learned in the very beginning, before there was any capacity to question them. The disappearance is not a solution to this. It is a beginning, a period of sufficient quiet that the patterns become visible. Visible enough to examine, to question, to choose differently. And that choice, the conscious choice made from genuine self-knowledge rather than automated fear, is what Jung meant by individuation, not becoming perfect, not transcending the human condition, but gradually, imperfectly, with tremendous difficulty and occasional failure, becoming actually yourself, rather than the accumulated performance of who you learned to be in order to survive. If you have been feeling lately like something essential in you is running out, if the conversations feel like they are consuming more than they are giving, if you notice yourself performing presence in moments when you are not actually present, if there is a quiet part of you that has been waiting for permission to stop for a while, that is not a signal of weakness. That is not ingratitude for the relationships you have. That is not selfishness. That is the part of you that knows something needs to happen that cannot happen inside the noise. Give it the room it is asking for. Not forever. Long enough to hear your own mind again. Long enough to feel the difference between who you are and who you perform. Long enough to let some things that were held together by your constant effort fall away, so you can see which ones rise again on their own. Because what survives your absence without demanding its own maintenance, that is real. And the life built around what is real, rather than what requires constant performance to sustain. That is the life Jung spent his entire career pointing toward. Not comfortable, not painless, but genuinely yours. And that is worth more than every exhausting performance that came before it. If this reached something in you that has been waiting to be reached, leave one word in the comments that describes what you have been running from. Because naming it is how it begins to lose its power over you.